All right, picture this. It's the freezing morning of January 24th, 1966. Air India Flight 101, a massive Boeing 707, is cruising through the skies, heading for London. In the pilot's seat, Captain J.T. D'Souza, literally one of the most seasoned, respected pilots they had. At 7 a.m., he hops on the radio to Geneva Air Traffic Control, cruising at a steady 19,000 feet. Now, that altitude puts him safely, or, well, so he thinks, about 3,000 feet above the jagged, totally unforgiving peak of Mont Blanc, Western Europe's tallest mountain. But then, chillingly, with zero warning whatsoever, Flight 101 just vanishes from the radar.
Right at that exact second, Geneva frantically asks a nearby Italian pilot, "Hey, do you see anything weird over the mountain?" His response was horrifying. He didn't see a plane. He saw a massive, lingering black cloud right near the summit. It wasn't some freak weather event. That was Flight 101. The plane had slammed violently into the side of Mont Blanc, scattering wreckage for miles. In a fraction of a second, all 117 lives on board were gone. Now, usually a tragedy like this just fades into aviation history, right? But this flight was different.
Okay, before we even talk about who was on that plane, we've got to look at this crazy timeline that absolutely rocked India. Just 13 days before this crash, 13 days, India's Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri drops dead from a sudden reported heart attack. Boom, out of nowhere. It's a monumental, totally unexpected loss that leaves the entire nation's leadership completely reeling and vulnerable.
So, let's dive into this. We've got two massive, history-altering deaths in under 2 weeks. First, the Prime Minister, and then, on Flight 101, the single most important scientist in the country. Is this just some unbelievably heartbreaking coincidence? Or are we looking at a highly calculated geopolitical conspiracy? To figure out why the whole world started asking that exact question, we need to look at the VIPs sitting in that doomed Boeing.
Enter Homi J. Bhabha. This guy wasn't just smart. He was the brilliant father of India's nuclear program. He was an absolute powerhouse. I mean, he worked with quantum mechanics legends like Niels Bohr over at Cambridge, then came back home and literally built India's entire scientific framework from scratch. He founded the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in 1945, and on the fateful day he died, he was actually on his way to a supercritical International Atomic Energy Agency meeting in Vienna.
And why did that meeting matter so much? Well, global power was shifting fast. In 1964, China successfully tested a nuclear weapon, and obviously that put India seriously on edge. So Bhabha goes on public radio and drops a bombshell, pun intended. He boldly claims that for just a fraction of the usual cost, he could build an Indian nuclear bomb in exactly 18 months. He just needed the government's green light. And guess what? Right before his sudden death, Prime Minister Shastri had finally given him that exact green light to hit the gas.
To really grasp the global panic Bhabha's promise caused, you've got to look at how fast these weapons were spreading. Back in 1945, it was just the USA. By 1964, China is in the club. So right as Bhabha is promising a rapid-fire Indian bomb, the global superpowers are sitting down in Geneva from 1965 to 1968 for these delicate non-proliferation treaty talks. Basically, they desperately wanted to keep new countries out of the nuke club. They were terrified that an Indian bomb would trigger this massive domino effect. Pakistan, the Middle East, you name it. The whole non-proliferation framework would completely collapse.
So yeah, Bhabha clearly had some incredibly powerful geopolitical enemies who'd love nothing more than to permanently stop his 18-month timeline. And the crash site itself? It was like the perfect breeding ground for paranoia. The impact was so crazy violent it carved a literal crater into Mont Blanc. Add in some brutal blizzard conditions, and rescue operations were called off almost instantly. No recoverable bodies, almost no recognizable wreckage. And the craziest part? No black box. The mountain literally swallowed all the evidence, leaving behind this eerie silence where wild theories could just explode.
Which brings us to suspect number 1, the CIA assassination theory. The big idea here was that the United States orchestrated the whole crash just to stop an Asian arms race in its tracks. And decades later, this theory actually seemed to find its smoking gun. In 2008, a journalist named Gregory Douglas published a book full of supposed conversations with a top CIA officer, a guy from the Directorate of Plans named Robert T. Crowley, aka the Crow. In this wild confession, Crowley supposedly bragged that the CIA planted a bomb right in the cargo hold of Flight 101. He claimed they purposely blew it up over a remote mountain to avoid the massive collateral damage of, say, detonating it over a crowded city like Vienna.
Now, what's really interesting here is how fast this sensational confession falls apart when you actually look into the guy who wrote it. Historians dug into this Gregory Douglas guy, and surprise, surprise, it was an alias. His real name was Peter Stahl. And Stahl, he was infamous in historical circles as a far-right fabricator of fake documents. Basically, a known fraudster. He'd actually used this exact same playbook years earlier, claiming he had secret docs from a dead CIA officer to prove the CIA killed JFK. So yeah, this whole confession was totally made up.
All right, let's pivot to suspect number 2, the secret midair collision.
So a French aviation enthusiast named John Daniel Roche comes up with a totally different theory. Years later, he's searching the glacier and finds this mysterious debris that he swears could not possibly belong to a commercial Boeing 707. His pitch? A covert Italian F-104G starfighter military jet was illegally spying on a French military base near Mont Blanc. To hide from radar, the jet turns its transponder off. Because of that, Air India Flight 101 has zero clue it's there, and bam! The two planes violently collide mid-air, kicking off this massive international cover-up.
I mean, it sounds exactly like a Cold War spy thriller, right? But again, let's look at the cold, hard facts. Aviation historians went through Italian military records with a fine-toothed comb. And guess what? Absolutely zero record of an Italian F-104 crashing anywhere near Mont Blanc on January 24th, 1966. Sure, a jet did take some damage that week, but the logs show it was hundreds of miles away down near Rome. There are literally zero flight logs to back up the secret midair collision.
So, time for the tragic truth revealed.
If it wasn't the CIA and it wasn't a phantom military jet, what actually brought down India's nuclear visionary? Well, the grim reality is laid out in the official 1967 French Inquiry Commission report, which, by the way, the Indian government totally accepted. You see, plane crashes are almost never just one big dramatic thing. It's usually a tragic chain reaction of tiny mistakes, known as the Swiss cheese model. Step 1, the plane's VOR radio navigation system, the thing that literally tells the pilot where they are in the sky, broke down right after they left Beirut. Step 2, because that broke, the pilot had to rely 100% on verbal instructions from air traffic control. And step 3, the weather was an absolute nightmare. As they got near Mont Blanc, they hit a whiteout, just a terrifying, disorienting wall of white where the snow, the clouds, and the mountain all look exactly the same.
And that brings us to the fatal conversation. At 19,000 feet, the pilot tells Geneva he thinks he's already passed the mountain. The air traffic controller checks his radar, realizes the pilot is dead wrong, and frantically tries to correct him with this chilling message. Air India 101, you have approximately 5 miles remaining to Mont Blanc. The pilot's response? Just one tragic word: Roger. This right here is where the deadliest misunderstanding happens. The phrasing was ambiguous. The pilot heard 5 miles remaining to Mont Blanc and somehow thought the controller meant he had safely cleared the peak. So feeling totally confident he's past the danger zone, he starts his descent. But he wasn't past it. He was still 5 miles short. He flew blindly down through that whiteout, straight into the solid rock face at 15,500 feet. So the crucial point is there were no assassins. There were no secret jets or crazy cover-ups. The real culprits? Just pure human error. A broken piece of gear, impossible visibility, and a desperately misunderstood radio call. Just a simple, heartbreaking failure to communicate in the cockpit that led to an unimaginable disaster. Which brings us to the epilogue, India's delayed dream. Even though this was definitively a tragic accident, losing Homi Bhabha so suddenly left this massive vacuum in India's nuclear policy. It literally altered the destiny of 1 billion people. Remember, Bhabha confidently promised an operational bomb in just 18 months. But without his genius, his drive, and his direct line to the Prime Minister, the whole program just hit a brick wall. It actually ended up taking 32 years, all the way until 1998, for India to finally develop a weaponized bomb. That huge 30-plus year gap, that's the true cost of Mont Blanc. But, and this brilliantly illustrates his impact, the foundation Bhabha built managed to survive the blow. In 1967, just a year after the crash, they renamed the atomic energy establishment to the Bhabha Atomic Research Center in his honor. By 1974, India pulls off its first successful test, Operation Smiling Buddha, proving his science was spot on. And then finally, in 1998, they reached his ultimate goal. We also really have to remember that Bhabha's legacy wasn't just about building bombs. The guy wanted to power a nation. Because of the insane scientific framework he built from absolute scratch,
India today is not just one of 9 recognized nuclear-armed nations, but they operate 25 nuclear reactors that provides about 3% of the entire country's electricity. The man who vanished in a split second on a frozen mountain left behind an engine that quite literally powers modern India.
And that leaves us with this final, absolutely wild bot to chew on. A broken radio, one misunderstood word, and a wall of snow didn't just bring down an airplane. They wiped out a nation's top leadership and delayed the rise of a global superpower by decades. We know the tragic truth now, but you really gotta wonder, how entirely different would the Cold War and the world as we know it today look if Air India Flight 101 had just flown 3,000 feet higher? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. I hope it helped you piece together the incredible puzzle of the Mont Blanc mystery.